Hello? Rescue hooks to rescue, Mayday! Get ahead, West. Bad Mayday, what's your location? Get the panel out of here, hurry up! We need radio silence, baby. Water in that 2.5 inch line. 48 inch water in a 2.5 inch line. To the rope, to the rope, to the rope. 35 in the rear, 35 in the rear.
Welcome to the Emergency Traffic Podcast. Hello again, and welcome back to the Emergency Traffic Podcast, where we review and discuss firefighter line of duty deaths from published reports. This is episode number 70, where we review the March 2012 line of duty death of a firefighter who responded as a mutual aid department to a movie theater fire in the small rural community of Abbotsford, Wisconsin. This fire was challenging the limited local firefighting resources when, unknown to them, the bowstring truss roof of the building that was built in 1948 suddenly collapsed onto a crew of 3 firefighters inside the structure, prompting an extensive rescue effort. So let me bring in Denis and Dirk, and after a review of FDNY training tip number 12 about wind-driven fire tactics and some current events, we will jump into the NIOSH report of this incident. Please listen and learn with us, and thank you for joining us. All right. Well, hello, Denis and Dirk. How are you guys doing today?
He's pointing at me.
They both pointed at each other.
Hey, Paul. Hey, Dirk. I'm just trying to figure out who that guy in the camera is.
I know. We haven't seen him for a while.
We have not.
Yeah.
We have not. Good to see you, Dirk.
Thank you. Glad to be back.
Yeah. So we're having a little bout of spring here. And you?
Nice. Yeah, it's kind of springy here, too. Yep.
Yeah. So not springy enough to go out and do anything, but springy enough to be a mess.
Yeah. It's supposed to. We'll probably get some more snow here yet, a little bit, but
We'll always get snow, like early May. There's usually a big dump coming. But
exactly.
Yeah. We know the end is in sight.
Yeah, I was out sitting in my sunroom the other day, and it was 43 degrees.
Nice.
Centigrade.
Wow.
Yeah.
Warm.
Yeah.
Got some
I
plants
fell
started
asleep.
and stuff. Yeah, good place to sleep. Oh, that's a good idea. I like
That's
it.
Celsius.
You get up looking like a lot.
That's Celsius, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Celsius
Fahrenheit.
hot.
Yeah,
Celsius
exactly right.
hot. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
That's right.
Dirk, you've been well. You've been working away and
Yeah, working away, slaving away.
slaving away.
Yeah, nothing exciting, no fires, anything. Just good old chasing alarms and medical calls. And oh no, I'm at a new station, so I got a new station assignment. On a
Cool.
ladder truck now, running with 4
Nice.
guys on it, and
Very good.
we're kind of like we call it downtown light. It's like West Central, so
Cool.
it's a little bit quieter than good old Station 2 there, but yeah, it's still downtown, so still busy.
Excellent. Okay. Well, welcome to episode 70 here. First of all, what we've been doing here this year, courtesy of Doug and Dirk, is they shared this FDNY tip book. So I've got a tip here from the New York Fire Department. They make a book that they publish for all their people, and it's a PDF, so you can download it. So we've been sharing one of these every episode. So this one here, tip number 12, was related to a fire that happened in January of 2024. They had Queens units operated at a fire in a 2-story 20 by 40 class 3 attached private dwelling. It's believed that the fire originated on the rear deck and quickly spread to the first and second floors. 4 FDNY members suffered burn injuries. Tragically, 1 civilian was killed and another sustained severe injuries. Consider the following point. So this is why I wanted to pick this one here, is the first due truck officer noted a light wind condition and made an announcement on his radio. FDNY members attempted an aggressive interior attack through the front door. These members received burn injuries. The light wind condition may have created a flow path towards the front door, causing very high heat. And if I remember correctly, NIOSH and those guys say anything above like 10 miles per hour is a wind-driven fire, and the conditions may be affected by it. We've seen so many fatalities from this, where there's a fire in the back and we go in the front and we are in the chimney, and there's been many fatalities due to that.
Yeah, you got to consider that the fire venting itself is creating a wind, if you will. And
Right.
when you add a natural wind on top of that, you can get, a real boost.
Yeah, for sure. So in this case, a second hose line was stretched through an exposure beside and operated from the exterior into the fire building. So they attacked from outside while the guys were trying to go in, or about the same time or just after from the front. This was coordinated with the interior unit so that they knew this was going on. And they use an acronym in New York called SSSS, so 4 S's: solid stream, steep angle, steady, and sprinkler when operating exterior lines into a building. So what they're saying is move it, oscillate it like a sprinkler, solid bore with a steep angle. You want to bounce off the ceiling to make a sprinkler inside the building. The actually it says steady, so don't move it, and you're making a sprinkler on that ceiling into the room. Which, if you watch the NISC, they do that water mapping test. It's quite informative. You can watch a video where they actually put buckets all over the floor in a room and sprayed water in from the outside to get what pattern distributed the most water evenly throughout the room.
And frankly, that's kind of the natural way to aim it at the ceiling. So,
Yeah. So when entering a structure or initiating a fire attack, knowing the wind direction is a critical fire ground factor. Knowing whether the wind is at your back, windward side, or if you're going against the wind, leeward side, is key size up factor. When wind impacting operations, we must consider alternate strategies. This includes quickly positioning hose lines to have the wind at our back from a flanking position. When the wind is blowing from the rear of a structure towards the front, the hose line should attempt access from the rear. Whenever members enter a structure for fire attack, they must remain low. So, and we, of course, we explored that in depth with the Vandalia fire a few months ago. That was a high-rise wind-driven fire that killed several FDNY members and initiated a lot of the testing that's going on today. And now my phone's ringing.
Yeah, same with the Boston. Shoot, the street name.
Back Bay fire.
Back Bay fire. Same thing, right? Wind from the Charlie side, pushing the flames to the Alpha and burnt the hose line through, and two firefighters died.
Exactly.
So, yeah, it's a classic traditional attack. I mean, I like the acronym because it really emphasizes the straight, steady, slow moving hose stream into a window with a steep angle. So yeah, I like that.
Yeah, you'll
I
have
don't
to
think
adopt that.
FDNY didn't want to call it a traditional attack because it became very controversial. But I think
Right, transitional. That's right. Oh no, can't do that.
yeah, exactly. But they've been doing it so and very successful. And I actually saw a video yesterday from Vancouver. Vancouver Fire had a high-rise fire. I would say 7th, 8th floor. Couldn't really see it, or couldn't count the floors. But they used a deck gun and water from a ladder truck to do a transitional and knock the flames down. And unfortunately, like with most of those videos, it cuts out just when it gets interesting, right? You see it, it's like 15 seconds, and it's like, oh yeah, no, the next 5 seconds will be really important to show, and then it's like, no.
Yeah, you want to see what happens. Yeah,
it's just
that's a big trick is using that ladder as a master stream, as a hose line, and keeping it low and shooting into the building rather than from above and wetting the roof down.
Yeah. So that's Vancouver, BC. We're talking about, not
not Vancouver,
British
Washington.
Columbia.
Yeah.
Well, so
the real Vancouver.
Ooh. Don't get our Washington listeners up in arms here now.
So, despite the tip saying, you should, pick a side where the wind is at your back, that's, in many cases, particularly on the cityscape, a street, like if it's the brownstone walk up or whatever the case may be, the option of picking your side, if you will, is sometimes not really there. So, you're on the east side. The east side is what you got access to. So,
but
obviously,
they went
always
through the next door house with a hose line, which is awesome.
Right, which is what I was going to say. Sometimes you got to think, if it's a corner room, there might be a window just around the corner, so you can improve your angle of attack. Keep it. The main thing is keep the wind in the back of your mind the whole time. Really, I think that's the message.
Excellent. Couple of current events here. So March 14th, just a week or 2 weeks ago, Pinedale, Mississippi firefighter fell off a brush truck while refilling it with water and suffered fatal head injuries during significant wildfire events that were going on in the area. And this filling from the top thing is something that's always bothered me. I mean, yes, it's a fire truck and you have to work on top of it to load hose or to stow equipment or whatever. But you can minimize how much you're on top of the truck, such as don't fill from the top. Fill from a tank, fill on the back, or fill through the pump or whatever. But if you can avoid climbing on the truck at any time, especially during a fire call when the footing might not be great, the lighting might not be great, the wind might be affecting you, other distractions, you're tired. Like, even at the fire station, when my last couple departments, we eliminated all the top fills because it's just it's a risk that you don't need to take.
Yeah, or you have to have engineered fall protection, right? Platform, something I can hold on to at least. So, yeah.
Exactly.
Well, so I know when I was in Ontario, the interpretation that was really starting to firm up very much is that falling from heights was a major focus of occupational health and safety provincially. And if you were a construction worker or you were working in a business or something like that, and you fell from heights because there was not a proper design or whatever the case may be, or you weren't operating in accordance with the principles and or the operating guidelines that the business had, the business would be charged basically, or the contractor, whoever it is. But when it came to the fire department, generally there's a hands-off approach, or has been, on occupational health and safety, because it's an emergency. Therefore, you take chances in an emergency. Essentially, I think has been the thought there. But they were moving around to thinking about that falling off of a fire truck when it's in the station, when it's undergoing a non-emergency, is unacceptable. And they were leading towards fall protection. So if you're on top loading hose in a fire truck in the station, you're required to have fall protection. And if you fail to do that, you could be charged. So there are ways around that, of course, and Dirk put his finger on it. Designing your hose bed with doors so that the doors open to the side and provide handrails. Making sure, for instance, that you've got collapsible handrail systems. And you see those on petroleum tankers and stuff like that, where guys get up on top all the time and there's a handrail system, and that's what it's there for, and it just collapses out of the way, and it's not a big deal. So, there's ways to get around that. Remote control monitors, what are you doing up there? Like you were saying, for refilling the tank, pipe that to ground level with a pipe. There's a belief, for instance, that if you push water up a pipe into the tank, that it creates more resistance and you can't move as much water. Nonsense. Not true.
Yep.
When you're up there with a hose, the water
from the engineer, it doesn't make sense. The hoses go to the same height.
Right? I am an engineer, believe me.
I know. I used to debate that with people all the time, but you're right.
I'm well aware that you did.
Yeah,
so
I used to.
That, there's no excuse, really, is where I'm going with that.
In the 80s, I delivered fuel with a fuel truck to a rural fuel delivery to farms and small businesses and stuff like that. And we had no fall protection. You were up on the top of that truck all the time, and you were on your own. And now you see these tanker trucks with the collapsible handrails, and I go like, what a wonderful idea. How come that wasn't a thing when I was delivering fuel? I was expendable, I guess. Sorry?
You were cheap and expendable.
That's right. Exactly. Okay. Moving on. Owners of an Airbnb in New York State were charged with manslaughter after the deaths of customers in a home that they had rented without working smoke detectors. So that's awesome. It killed 2 people and injured 2 others. You're renting these Airbnbs. You really don't have a choice. You get what you get. They're supposed to have smoke detectors and all the required things, but this home didn't, and they've charged the owners of the home with manslaughter. So good on them, in my opinion.
So smoke detectors are part of a fire alarm system, right? So the building might have required a fire alarm system. Otherwise, it'd be smoke alarms, right? Like single station.
Okay.
Or interconnect.
Terminology: smoke alarms. You're right. Most residences, it's just smoke alarms. So a detector and a warning system. Speaking of smoke alarms, and smoke detectors, the report on the mega Walmart warehouse in South Plainfield, Indiana was released last week. It's a very interesting read if you're a little bit into the technical aspect of it, but there's a summary as well. And we're going to do a tailboard talk soon with the investigator from the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation, Gordon Routley, about this incident. So this is the incident where the warehouse was on fire. Firefighters responded. The fire was out. The sprinkler system put it out, and the firefighters overhauled it. And they were going to turn the firefighting systems off. They were in the process of doing so, and the fire erupted. And by the time they were able to turn the firefighting system, the pumps and stuff back on, the fire had gained a hold and burned the building completely down, and even went through the 4-hour rated firewall from one side to another. So it's an interesting read, and we're going to talk more about these, because the problem is these immense warehouses and big buildings are in everybody's fire district these days. There's a plethora of these buildings going up, concrete tilt up, massive structures that depend on, well, maybe not in Hammond's Plains, but, on your way there to Costco or wherever. So we're going to talk about these, because it's like I think Dirk has said before, it's a high rise laying down, basically.
Yeah, more referring to those 4 or 5 story walk up apartments that are 3 blocks, city blocks long. But when you're saying the sprinklers put the fire out, I don't think you're correct there. The sprinklers did not put the fire out.
They held the fire.
They're not designed to put the fire out, right? Actually, your friends from B Shifter, they have a little. I don't know. It's not long enough if you ask me, but they have a little video about big box stores and the sprinklers, and they were actually showing with thermal imaging camera and all this stuff what the sprinkler does and what it doesn't do. And that might be something interesting for the viewers to watch. Maybe we can post it on our Facebook page.
All right. Yeah, for sure. And I mean, when I was reading the report, which I haven't quite finished yet, the sprinkler system in this building is extremely complex. Like, I had to almost take notes to understand what was going on, because the building was actually built initially, and then the owner added this palletized large racking system that they added sprinklers to. So there was 2 separate sprinklers that were, and the one system contained the fire and they thought was out, and then the second system didn't have enough water to, maybe, they're not sure, to put the second fire out. Anyway, interesting. We'll talk about it later. Let's see. Just a quick note here on a personal matter, because I worked in the fire apparatus industry for 25 years. 2 prominent fire apparatus industry pioneers, well, modern day pioneers, in the after 1950. Bob Mather, the co-founder of Superior Emergency Vehicles, which was founded from 73 to 92, and it was sold to E1 and went till 2005, dies after a battle with dementia. He was known for his extremely quick and long memory. He was sharp as a tack. I was always a little nervous even having a discussion with him, because he would remember stuff that you had no idea. He would remember the prices of bids 10 years ago and who bid and everything. It was amazing. He was also a very successful musician, and he played piano. Very well liked by his friends and stuff like that. Very well liked and renowned in the industry. Superior in the 2000s had like over 30% market share in Canada. That's why E1 bought him in 92. But he had passed away, unfortunately, recently. He used to live on an island near Sydney, BC. Dick Young, who most people in Canada don't know who it is, Dick Young, he was a family member of Young Fire Apparatus, which was a famous fire apparatus builder in New York State that ended up closing in the 80s or 90s due to a bunch of issues, family and union and stuff like that, kind of like Tebow, if you will. Anyway, and then he formed the Performance Advantage Company, which we know as PAC Equipment Mounts. Before PAC, in between Young Fire Apparatus and PAC, Dick is said to be the founder of the popular extruded aluminum fire apparatus bodies and cabs that we know today. He had discovered this process and went around to builders like Emergency One and Superior and others and said, you should use these extrusions to build your fire trucks with. And that's how it took off. And now E1, Superior, Ferrera, General Safety, which is Rosenbauer EXT, Fort Garry and others, Pierce uses it on their aero bodies, aluminum extruded construction. So anyway, he passed away this week. So it was something in the fire service circles. Okay, this week's episode. In March of 2012, a 34-year-old male lieutenant, the victim, lost his life at a theater fire after a roof collapsed, trapping him within the theater. Abbotsford is a very small city, 2.7 square miles in Clark and Marathon counties in central Wisconsin, about 125 miles west of Green Bay. Population was 2,300 people in the 2010 census. At the time of the incident, the First Due Department was operating from a single fire station with 26 members, serving a population of about 2,300, with an area in the town and around of 22 square miles. They had an engine, 2 tankers, a ladder truck with a pump, a rescue truck, a brush truck, and 2 ambulances. The department provided fire and EMS services within its jurisdiction, responding to about 50 calls per year, usually just a couple structure fires per year, which is not unexpected for a small department of 2,300 people. Members within the department received an hourly rate per call, so paid on call. Officers also received a monthly stipend. At the time of the incident, the fire department was rated as Class 5 by Insurance Services Organization, or ISO, which we're not familiar with in Canada, but it's a rating service for fire departments that's quite public in the States. Canada, we have a similar one, IAO, but they don't really publicize the ratings very much. And it's not the whole department, it's zones within a community. Anyway, this department did provide medical evaluations annually and respiratory fit testing for its members. At the time of the incident, the Mutual Aid Fire Department, which is the victims department, so actually they were on a mutual aid call, was operating also from a single fire station, 25 members, serving a population of about 2,500 people within an area of about 99 square miles. The department also had a substation housing some additional apparatus. This department had 2 engines, 2 tanker engines, 3 tankers, a brush truck, 2 ambulances. The department provided fire and EMS services within its jurisdiction, corresponding to approximately 40 calls per year, 1 or 2 structure fires. Members within this department received an hourly rate of call, and officers above the rank of lieutenant also got a monthly stipend. In 2010, they also had a Class 5 rating. They did not provide any medical evaluations or fit testing to that department. So a little bit of differences between the departments. Small fire departments that provide EMS are quite common in the Midwest in the United States, where it's either a private ambulance service or the municipality takes it over with the fire department. And the call volume is probably so low that a private company isn't interested. Both departments had a designated safety officer who coordinated the department medical and safety and health issues with their members. When available, the safety officer or a designated safety officer would be also utilized as an incident safety officer at emergency incidents. Suggested guidelines were reviewed, and they were generic that the fire department had minimum guidance for fireground operations. The 2 departments had developed documents for their individual departments, but there was no mutual aid standard operating guidelines for emergencies, nor had been developed. Neither fire department had policies, guidelines, or procedures relating to a mayday, truck company operations, building construction, fire behavior, or risk management. Neither fire department was aware of NFPA 1500, the Fire Department Occupational Health and Safety Program, at the time. All fire and EMS departments within the county had signed mutual aid agreements. Neither of the safety officers had any formal incident safety officer training, such as 1521, which I asked the provincial guy in Alberta here last week whether they were going to bring that in or not. And he said, well, only if enough people request it. So you can't take 1521 in Alberta here and be certified right now.
Just reminding everybody, this incident happened in 2012.
Yep.
So some of these things for smaller departments still didn't really exist. I mean, certainly it was adopted by bigger departments and the more progressive departments. So we're going to talk a little bit about training and experience of the department and the people involved in this call. So the victim who died in this is a firefighter from the Mutual Aid Department, had been with his department for approximately 10 years. He held certifications in Firefighter 1, which you're going to find out is really a state certification, but roughly equivalent to NFPA 1001 Level 1. He was an emergency medical technician. He also had courses in IS 700 and LP gas emergencies. He held the rank of lieutenant within the department during this past year. He was also a detective, so his real job was as a detective in the sheriff's department in the neighboring county. And this is the same county where the mutual aid department comes from. From 2010 until the day of the incident, the victim had attended approximately 30 training courses offered at the fire department, had responded to approximately 17 fire EMS calls. So I'm thinking the 30 training courses would be like 30 training nights is what they're really talking about there in a couple of years, right? The initial IC for the first Dew Fire Department, where the incident happened, in Abbotsford, in other words, had been with this department for approximately 15 years, and he held the rank of second assistant chief for the past 2 years. He held certifications as a Wisconsin entry-level firefighter in 1999, which was a 60-hour course. He was also an incident safety officer, which he achieved in 2004, so 8 years before this incident. He was a Wisconsin entry-level driver operator, established in 2003. That was a 30-hour course. And he had his annual HAZWOPER certification. And he was a first responder. He also completed documented courses on the incident command system, such as IS 700, 100, 200, 300, 400, and 800. The second IC for the first Dew department, who then assumed command at the scene during the firefighting operations and was in command at the time of the roof collapse, had been with his department for approximately 22 years, holding the rank of fire chief for the past 2 years. He held certifications in Firefighter 1 in 96, so significantly before this call. Wisconsin entry-level driver operator in 2003, incident safety officer in 2004, annual HAZWOPER training. He had also completed and documented courses in ICS such as 100, 200, 300, 400, 800. In Wisconsin, individuals wishing to become a volunteer firefighter had to complete a state of Wisconsin Firefighter 1 course, which is roughly equivalent to NFPA 1001, within a year of joining any volunteer department. So this is a statewide requirement. During this 1 year, or before they get that course, entry into structure fires was prohibited. The Wisconsin Department of Safety and Professional Services required fire departments to maintain a training and education program biannually or more often. So every couple of years, right? If necessary, to prevent occupational accidents, deaths, injuries, and illnesses. I don't know if they'll prevent them, but it certainly gives us extra training in those areas. Both departments usually acquired 1 to 3 structures a year to perform live burns for training. NFPA 1403 standard on live fire training evolutions was followed during these training sessions. However, no mutual aid training had occurred between the two departments.
That's so important, is to get your mutual aid partners involved in training together so you work out the little bugs. Well, what do you call it? Do you call it an engine or a pumper? Or what channel do you talk on or whatever? Yeah. So how to communicate with each other. Equipment and personnel, just a couple minutes to touch on that. The initial dispatch by radio included a first Dew department with mutual aid assistance from the victims department. The following units responded to the incident scene following the initial dispatch. So I kind of summarize these a little bit, but hopefully we'll keep them in our mind as we go through the incident, because they're on 2 different sides of the building, so it gets a little confusing here. So engine 1 from the first Dew department, which was a driver, 3 firefighters, and the assistant chief, who ended up being the incident command for the first department. Ladder 1 just had a driver and a firefighter. Engine 5 had a driver and another officer. Tanker 1 had the fire chief, so he brought the tanker. Rescue 1 had the safety officer. And then some additional people are responded in their own private vehicles, which is common in volunteer part-time on-call departments.
That's 11 plus POVs.
Okay, good. Yeah, good to summarize. The mutual aid department brought a engine tender 1, which was a driver who was a driver, an assistant chief, which was the IC for that mutual aid department. Engine 2 was a driver, 3 firefighters, and a lieutenant. And engine rescue 1, which had a driver, a firefighter, and the lieutenant, which was the victim. So he came from engine rescue 1. So it was like a squad, would be called in some areas, where it's a rescue and an engine together.
Yeah, so 10 more.
So we got 21. So it's a decent initial response. Water supply. The town's municipal water supply with hydrants was available during the incident. However, the first Dew department was delayed in establishing water to engine 1 because the 6-inch supply hose was charged mistakenly when connected to other hose sections still in the bed of the truck. Who has not done that? Raise your hand. What? You've never done that?
I would say, Paul, that we used to drill relentlessly on hydrant hookups exactly for this reason. We all had our opportunity to see if we could bend the truck.
I don't think I've did it with the supply line ever, but I've loaded a few pre-connect beds by mistake for sure.
Yeah. Well, it happens with a supply line when the driver who's laying out and the hydrant man are not communicating
Yep.
adequately, and or the guy in the hydrant's all gung ho, and the truck's around the corner and they're not communicating, or he's
Well,
just not paying attention.
if you see the theater burning and you haven't done a lot of training, you're gonna probably open
Yeah.
that hydrant a little too quickly.
Yeah.
I just had a blast from the past here. I saw a video, like a recent video, where they strung the line, and the operator came out and had a hose clamp and set the hose clamp, and then did the rest. Right, so the hydrant guy could open the hydrant and then make its way back to the truck. I've never seen it being used. I've never seen high vol hose bed being charged. So I guess we are trained pretty well, and due to that, we actually got rid of the hose clamp.
We used to use the hose clamp at every call. That was standard practice. The hose went to the hydrant. As soon as the truck stopped, the pump operator would grab the clamp, throw it on the hose, go back, get tank water going to the lines, and then he could disconnect and connect. And we did it with the 65, and we did it with the 100 mil hose as well.
And it makes sense in small department because you want that hydrant guy back at the truck getting ready.
Right.
For us, we get so much manpower coming at a call. The first arriving pump, water supply pump, these guys are they're doing grunt work around, but they are not going to be assigned because their officer becomes fire commander. So
This was pretty standard when we used 2.5, 65, and 3-inch, 75 hoses as supplies. Putting the clamp on was really standard for that stuff. But when we moved to high vol, 4-inch and 5-inch, it got more difficult because, and I've seen this, if you don't put the clamp in the right place, it becomes a flying projectile. If you don't have the right clamp, it could become a flying projectile. It takes time to put the clamp on, and if you're a really good pump operator and there's no other difficulties to slow you down, you can get that thing hooked up pretty darn quick. But if you got to go looking for a 25-foot pony, that's time lost. You got to pull off the bed to find a place to break the hose, that's time lost. So there's a lot of those things, right, that can affect how your operation goes. And I have vivid memories of pulling the hose bed off and going at the bodywork with a sledgehammer, trying to straighten stuff out before the chief discovered it.
In Dartmouth, I imagine.
No, I'm not saying where.
Yeah, right. So the victims department had no delay in supplying water to their apparatus from another hydrant that was located near the rear of the theater because they were on the Charlie side.
Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about PPE that was in service on this call, again, 13 years ago. It was reported to the NIOSH investigators that the victim who perished in this fire, plus firefighter 1 and firefighter 2, these would be all from the mutual aid company, entered the structure wearing a full array of personal protective clothing and equipment that consisted of turnout gear, coats and pants, gloves, boots, and a handheld radio, but not with extended mics, SCBA with integrated pass devices, Nomex hoods, and helmets. So the victim's facepiece was properly connected to his mask-mounted regulator when he was found, I guess, and was reported to be appropriately positioned about his face prior to the collapse and when he was later located in the debris. But the intermediate pressure hose had been burned through. The last flow test on the SCBA was conducted in 2010 due to budgetary constraints. Was that a Survive Air Pack? I could tell from the photos it wasn't.
I don't know.
Yeah,
Hang on, I'll look.
A long voice emitter on it, so I'm just digging from memory. So anyway, interestingly later, though, is that like 4 months later, in July of 2012, NFPA issued, and you guys who've been in the service a little while will remember this, they issued a safety alert on SCBA facepiece lenses when investigations and additional research from incidents, obviously, found that SCBA facepiece lenses may undergo thermal degradation when exposed to intense heat. And they found out that this wasn't necessarily from a single incident. It may have been from multiple incidents. It's plastic, right? So investigations conducted by NIOSH, FFIPP, which is the Firefighter Investigation and Prevention Program, that's a mouthful. Anyway, during the period of 2002 to 2011, so over a 10-year period, found evidence of thermal degradation, not necessarily failure, but degradation of facepiece lenses that may have been a contributing factor in 3 fatalities. So they failed because they had been degraded before the incident. NIOSH also reported on during this investigation of 3 SCBAs from a state training academy where SCBA facepieces, they pulled these facepieces out of service and investigated them. They showed evidence of thermal degradation after being used in live fire training. Additionally, in 4 other NIOSH line of duty death investigations, the evidence, while not conclusive, suggested possible SCBA degradation or failure. I
I
remember at the time
Yep,
there was quite a fuss over this.
yeah. And I took a
Like, oh my goodness.
course. Was it a basement fire from UL FSRI? I think it was 2018, 2019, and they were talking about this degradation due to live fire training and fire operations, and they showed a simple trick to check your lens if it's damaged or not. And it's really just you take a piece of paper, white piece of paper, you take your SCBA mask, and then you shine a light through, so to create a shadow. And when you see these little spider webs all over, it's done. It is previously exposed to heat, and it's got those micro cracks. And I felt like it was super interesting to see. So I tested mine. It's hard when you have a scratched up lens that's different, but if you have these micro fractures, yeah, you might want to ask for a new mask.
Yeah, I know. I remember this vividly because I'd been selling equipment. This was an MSA, by the way, an early MSA 2216 with the mass-mounted regulator. I should have
In
known
this
that
incident, yeah.
because I sold those in this incident. But I remember this vividly, and in fact, the department I'm in, a nearby city I got a new job in 2011 in Clearwater, and around this time, in a metropolitan city near me, who I know some guys on the department there, they had changed all their SCBA masks when this bulletin came out to get because the new standard came out with more heat resistant plexiglass in the masks, and
Changing
so that
materials, yeah.
changed different material, and I pushed hard and was successful. I maybe got a grant or something. I can't remember where I got the money, and we changed all our masks as well because this was just too much of a risk to our firefighters to have a SCBA fail. And they were failing, due to damage and also at fairly low temperatures. So that's why they changed the testing. So remember this quite well. So anyway, good.
So, and you can look this stuff up, and there's photographs of what a good lens and a bad lens looks like, and that kind of stuff. So you can do some investigation in your own department, particularly if you're running old air packs.
For sure.
Yeah,
Okay.
because NFPA has standards on air bottles, how old they can be, but there is no standard that says how old the pack can be.
Yeah, you can keep them in service as long as they pass tests every year. That's right. Okay, the structure. The fire originated in the lobby of a movie theater that had been constructed in 1948. The theater was Type 3 construction and contained masonry block walls with a brick facade on the alpha side. It had a bowstring truss roof system spanning over the auditorium from the Bravo side to the Delta side. And the theater measured approximately 50 feet by 100 feet, containing 6,750 square feet or 4,500 square feet above ground. During the incident, the presence of the bowstring truss roof system was not identified by either of the departments.
Say.
Okay, so access to the attic of the theater, which is where the bowstring truss roof was, of course, was through the use of a straight ladder positioned at the rear of the movie screen. The theater owner did not recall the size of the wooden cords used to construct the bowstring roof, but he did say the construction was original and he could walk on the rafters to change light bulbs. The actual auditorium contained a concrete floor. The concrete floor in the auditorium had a gradual downward slope from the Alpha side to the Charlie side, so to the rear, so you could have, staggered seating. In 1996, the theater was purchased by the current owner and renovated. The auditorium was expanded to 220 seats. The movie screen was replaced with a 35-foot by 10-foot screen. Sidewall curtains were added, and a new ceiling, a drop ceiling with tiles, was installed. The owner recalled that the new ceiling had been placed below the original ceiling, about 12 to 18 inches below it. The new ceiling contained a total of 6 ceiling fans with lights, 3 lights suspended above each theater aisle. Further details regarding the materials used to construct the new ceiling were not available to investigators. The sidewall curtains were placed over existing pegboard and sound foam insulation that was unprotected, that covered all exposed masonry walls within the viewing area. In 2002, the theater's rolled metal roof was damaged by a nearby tornado. The damaged roof was replaced with asphalt shingles. During 2000 and 2008, during 2007-2008, the theater had a small electrical fire in the ceiling above the lobby area with minimal damage. The first 2 fire department had performed fire safety inspections in the theater, but the theater was never pre-planned. Bowstring truss roof construction. Bowstring truss roofs are easily identified by the roof's arched or curved outline. Bowstring truss roofs became popular in the 30s. Prior to 1960, bowstring truss roof design was one of the most common design types for large commercial and industrial structures. The bowstring truss roof was commonly used in facilities such as automobile dealerships. What was the one in New Jersey? The automobile dealership fire?
Hackensack.
Hackensack, New Jersey.
1988.
1988. Yeah, we have to do that one day. Repair facilities, bowling alleys, grocery stores, and industrial complexes wherever large open floor spaces with limited interior supports were needed. Bowstring truss roofs may suffer from a little-known phenomenon related to inaccuracies in early industry-accepted truss design assumptions. One significant deficiency involves the tensile strength of the bottom cord. So I put this in here on purpose because people need to know this. During the 60s, full-size lumber tests revealed that construction-grade lumber with natural imperfections, knots and checks and irregular grain, provides in-service tensile strength significantly less than predicted by earlier small-scale clear wood tests. By 1968, the lumber industry standards established a reduction factor of 0.55 to relate to the tensile strength to bending strength. So they reduced the strength that was estimated by half almost. Current building codes have increased the factor to 0.60, meaning the allowed tensile strength design values are only about 40% of those listed in early codes. So every roof that's out there from before 1968 may be only rated at 40% of its load. Thus,
Add to that degradation over time, right?
Right, plus time. So, as I underlined here, all trusses constructed before the late 60s have a common code deficiency. The bottom cord members may have inadequate tensile strength to support code-prescribed roof loads.
So I just want to talk a little bit about trusses for a second, if I could. This is bowstring trusses, right? So you should Google that and have a look at it because it's important. And plus, Paul, I think there's a diagram of one,
Yep,
right?
I'll throw it in the socials.
Yeah. So all trusses, every single member in the truss is important. You take one away and the trusses will threaten to collapse. But you can also have what they call parallel cord trusses. They're also subject to collapse too if you lose the bottom cord. The bottom cord is in tension, right? So every truss is subject to collapse. But the thing about bowstring trusses is that they're very long. That's why they used them. They had the ability, and because they're long and big, they tend to be spaced quite wide apart, or they can be. So they're particularly susceptible to a particular failure. And if there is a failure in one of them, and you can see some videos of that, you'll get a progressive collapse, takes the entire roof down.
Yeah, Phoenix Fire did some videos of a bowstring truss roof. They set fires inside the building and trying to determine like how much fire load it could take and how long the roof and what the roof would look like. Because the thing about these roofs is they typically do not exhibit any signs of weakness before they collapse instantly. And so there's no giveaway. There's no sponginess. There's no, hey, sag in this corner or anything like that. The whole thing goes when it goes because that cord lets go.
Yeah. And you'll see bowstring trusses have been, in some cases, modified by adding steel tension bars across them.
Yep.
to in line with the cord to give them additional strength because people were concerned about them. But
Unprotected
steel, right?
steel. Unprotected
Steel,
steel.
unprotected, exposed to
Yep.
fire, fails, right? So you've got those issues. But one of the things that kind of jumps out at you here, and Paul read it already, says they weren't aware it was a bowstring truss roof. And this building, you could see the building clearly from the Alpha side, from the street. You could also see it from the Charlie side across the field. And there's pictures in the report of the building from the Charlie side. Why couldn't you tell that there was a bowstring truss up there? And that's because it had the walls were parapeted like a fort, and there was these crenellations along the top, like battlements, all around the building, hiding the roof.
Yep. You couldn't tell
Also,
from the
keeping
street.
the snow on the roof.
Exactly. The weather. Next point. Good introduction. The weather occurred. It was a sunny, partly cloudy day with the temperature outside ranging in the 20s Fahrenheit. So that'd be about -8 or 7. The Celsius. The area of the state had seen varying amounts of snow in the previous few months. NIOSH investigators could not determine the amount of snow and ice that were on the roof at the time of the fire, because obviously the roof collapsed. But photos taken by bystanders during the incident indicated there could have been several inches to potentially a foot or more of snow and ice remaining in the area. So here's our little virtual 360. We kind of got into it a little bit already here, but upon arrival, the firefighters would find a typical small town North American main street with angle parking on one side, parallel on the other. A grain elevator in the distance along the railway allowance. It looks like hometown everywhere in North America. The fire building was in the middle of the block between a typical brick storefronts with large windows. The theater building itself appears as a single story on the front Alpha side with a cantilevered roof on a diagonal over the lobby entrance. Sort of a 1960s look to it, if you will.
40s, actually.
40s look to it. Okay, yep. Like Highway 66 kind of thing.
Yeah.
Route 66. There were 3 aluminum frame plate glass doors and a few marquee windows for movie posters and such. A few feet behind the front of the building was a taller section of the building. Apparently, cinder block rose up to what appeared to be a flat roof from the front. The Bravo and Delta exposures were brick commercial buildings. The Charlie side was again a cinder block wall with 2 man doors on the Bravo Charlie corner and another towards the Delta side, Delta corner of the C side.
So just one other thing about the 360 is there was alleyways on both sides of the building. But the one on the right-hand side was bricked over with a door in it, right? So if you didn't know there was an alley behind that door, you wouldn't know it was there. It's between the two buildings. But the point thing I wanted to point out about was that because there was not continuous with the adjacent buildings, a bowstring truss, when it collapses, can also push out on the walls. So you also have the threat of sidewalls collapsing. Anyway, we're going to talk a little bit about the investigation. On March 4th of 2012, at approximately 12:15 hours, so around noontime, an on-duty patrol officer, who was the fire chief actually in the victims department, noticed heavy black smoke in the sky within the town, followed by what he could see flames coming from the front of the theater that he noticed after turning down the side street. One of the theater owners had been at the theater 2 hours before the fire had been discovered, so 10 o'clock in the morning, and had turned on 3 thermostats and the popcorn butter machine in the lobby concessions area. Must have had a matinee or something coming on. Anyway, over the police radio channel, the patrol officer immediately notified dispatch of the exact location before exiting his patrol car and evacuating the B and D side exposures, because there were buildings on either side, right? He also requested dispatch to tune out his department, fire department, since they were the next due fire department. He then returned to the Alpha side of the structure, where he spoke with the theater owners, who confirmed that no one was currently inside the structure. NIOSH investigators are unsure if this information was ever passed on to the initial arriving unit and or the officer initially in charge. They couldn't ascertain that information. Activities of first due department prior to the collapse of the roof. So prior to Engine 1 arrival of the department where the incident occurred, Abbotsford in other words, the second officer in charge, who was then the IC, for that first due department for Abbotsford. Although he wasn't identified over the radio, his initial action plan was to fight the fire defensively. So he never communicated that. So that was not communicated to other personnel. But that was his plan in his mind, anyways. Upon Engine 1's arrival, personnel observed black smoke with heavy flames coming from under the canopy on the east side of the structure. In other words, coming out that front wall under the canopy near the doors. The second assistant chief exited Engine 1 and grabbed the 6-inch large diameter supply hose and walked it down to the hydrant, which was 30 to 50 yards south of the building. The second assistant chief exited Engine 1 and grabbed the 6-inch large diameter supply hose and walked it down to the hydrant, which was approximately 30 to 50 yards south of the fire building. After his safety officer brought him a fitting, which he hadn't taken when he left, he connected and charged the supply hose, not knowing it was still connected into the hose bit. After flowing water into the front of the theater, Engine 1 that carried 1,000 gallons of water had run out before the hydrant line was established. So it took 2 to 5 minutes. They don't know for sure. He then shut down the hydrant and was assisted by the safety officer in breaking down the supply hose sections so that it could be drained and then reconnected to Engine 1. The safety officer also assisted with manning a hose line on the east side, removing debris from the lobby, and changing air bottles. The safety officer did not have a radio until after the collapse occurred. So not really operating in the job of safety officer. While the second assistant chief worked on the water supply, ladder 1 had arrived on the scene with 2 personnel, including the accountability officer, and was then followed by Engine 5. The aerial operator briefly assisted the operator of Engine 1 with this mess with the hose before he walked to the rear of the structure. He walked down the D side of the theater, which is through that door I was telling you about, and observed no apparatus behind. Okay, the second assistant chief then observed Tanker 1 from the Mutual Aid Department arriving on scene, so he advised him to go to the rear of the theater. The second assistant chief does not recall speaking with anyone operating on the Charlie side after their initial arrival on scene, except for when the patrol officer, who was the victim's fire chief, was updating them about initial conditions. So he does actually provide that information, but later. After the water supply was established for Engine 1, the second assistant chief, sorry about that, guys, walked back to the front of the building and observed two-man crews operating 1.75-inch hose lines defensively on the canopy and into the theater's main entrance. So in the area of the canopy, I'm guessing not probably on top of it. The 2 hose lines were doing a good job of knocking down the heavy fire, which was in the lobby, right? So we've all been in these old theaters. There's a very shallow lobby at the front before you walk in the doors behind. The 2 hose lines were doing a good job of knocking down the heavy fire, clearly that you could see. He was then met by his fire chief, who took over their command. They spoke briefly about current conditions, and the second assistant chief advised him that the Mutual Aid Department was at the rear of the building.
As a note here, the fire chief assumed that the Mutual Aid Department would fight the fire from the rear. Throughout the incident, up to the point of the collapse, each department operated independently of the other, with minimal face-to-face communication between the fire chief and the off-duty Mutual Aid chief, the patrol officer.
So these are symptoms of never working together on mutual aid training. That's what this is. And not having a good command system that really ties it all together.
Which is surprising, since these people, the 2 that we know of had taken Incident Command 1, 2, 3, 400, which are all about know what your people are doing, divide into sectors, have communications, all these 14 principles of Incident Command, along with the 8 from Brunacini's Fire Command. I mean, these are key features that unfortunately didn't get
But
adopted.
they never internalized it, I don't think, or at least took that
the course,
and ran with
got
it.
the certificate, but didn't work that way.
Yeah. It's also a symptom of being the fire chief for a year or 2 and then not being the fire chief for a year or 2. And very typical, and I see this in volunteer departments where I do studies, is they elect the favorite guy, and he's not necessarily the guy who's going to make the hard changes. So it's a terrible way to learn that lesson. Anyway, the fire chief and his aerial operator had a conversation about setting up an elevated master stream because the fire was observed then along the A-side roof line I presume that's the roof line over the little projecting part in the front, because they didn't know where the roof line actually was, or they would have known it was a bowstring. So
Yeah, they probably
probably,
couldn't. They couldn't visualize behind it anyway.
yeah. So you got this parapet wall that's hiding the bowstring, and then you've got this projection out the front. So I guess you had fire in there somewheres.
Yeah.
So it's not real clear, but I'm picturing in my mind how this must have worked, because the fire would have been inside the building, and I could see it pushing out, underneath that parapet, or at least coming up over the parapet, something like that. So the elevator master stream was going to be used in an attempt to stop the fire from progressing past the lobby parapet wall, there we go, into the theater's auditorium. The second assistant chief then assisted in setting up the aerial ladder. Keep in mind, we had 11 plus independently arriving firefighters on scene at the front of the building. So I'm not sure why the chiefs are getting involved in some of this hands-on stuff. Maybe where they felt comfortable working, I don't know.
Yeah, could be.
Yeah, they certainly felt shorthanded, that's for sure, or at
Mhm.
least didn't have everybody doing these types of jobs. Anyway, while the elevated master stream was being set up, one of the two-man hose teams entered into the lobby of the theater with a 1 3/4 inch hose line. So they had 4 guys designated to hose teams, right? Two-man hose teams. We mentioned that earlier. Although they had not been tasked with advancing the hose line into the theater, the 2 firefighters on this particular hose crew stated to NIOSH investigators later that they were short-handed and knew what had to be done to extinguish the fire. They were able to make it to the hallway running between the Bravo and Delta sides, which is the hallway across right in behind the lobby. There's a hallway that runs from side to side. We've all been in these theaters, runs to the aisles. They were able to make it to that hallway, which gave them access to the left hand with the Bravo side, and the right hand, the Delta sides of the seating within the auditorium. They decided to go left because they had observed an enclosed room with fire in it, believed to be a quiet room. But before they could get to it, they were met by personnel from the victims department who was coming in from the Charlie side.
Well,
Yeah,
just
and the note
imagine.
here.
So you're in there, you're advancing your hose line, you see a fire, you see this room, and all of a sudden there's another company coming from the back of the theater.
Potentially
Yeah,
shoot
Potentially,
what
water
yeah.
at each
the?
Yeah.
other. Potentially.
Yeah. So this host crew recalled hearing the mutual aid department being dispatched for the incident, but they did not know that the victim and 3 of the other members from the department had entered the building. Again, there's a lack of communication
That would be a
between
surprise.
those companies.
So
Yeah.
now you got a door open at the bottom of the auditorium, which we know is the lowest part because the floor slopes. And they're coming on the Charlie side. And you're coming in from the Alpha side, and you got doors open up there. And you got a fire in the building. Now you have a flow
Yeah.
path.
We're going to cook stuff.
Anyway, the 2 crews had a face-to-face conversation before the first 2 department turned around and went towards the other end of the hallway, towards the Delta side where there were washrooms.
Yeah.
The fire chief for the first 2 department asked about accountability, and the accountability officer stated they would get into position. Because up until now, he was working on, what did they say, trying to get the engine in service, I think it was.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. The first assistant chief, who had arrived on engine 5 and was originally working on disconnecting utilities on the Charlie side, had a face-to-face with the fire chief on the Alpha side and advised him that the mutual aid department was operating on the Charlie side and had a positive pressure ventilation fan running, and he was having difficulty in securing the building's utilities. So you got the natural flow path, plus they're pushing it with a PPV. He stated to NIOSH investigators, so clearly there's smoke in the building. He stated to NIOSH investigators they had a conversation with victims 1 and the second assistant chief regarding 3 of their personnel being in the theater, issues on accountability, and who is the mutual aid officer in charge. The fire chief remembers having conversations over the radio with dispatch regarding the utilities not being turned off. The fire chief decided to walk down the street approximately 75 yards south of the building to where one of the theater owners worked to verify who supplied their utilities. The amount of time taken to do this is unknown. He then returned to the Alpha side of the building to assist with aerial operations. At the direction of the fire chief, the elevated master stream was initially operated manually from the ground and flowed water onto the canopy and the front side of the parapet wall. The elevator master stream was then blindly operated onto the theater roof over the auditorium located behind the parapet wall. So they're shooting water over the parapet wall onto what they assumed was a flat roof in behind, I guess.
Onto the snow that's on the roof.
Right. So they're adding weight. The fire chief then decided to send 2 firefighters up the aerial ladder so they could visually direct the master stream on any visible fire. He then turned aerial operations over to his aerial operator. After this, the fire chief walked over to the lobby area and observed one of his crews operating inside a large hallway that led into the theater's auditorium. So you got those double doors there. The fire chief and his second assistant chief then removed a large roof vent from the lobby area, so they're still messing around with that single-story roof in the front, to give his hose crews additional space to work. Fire conditions were knocked down in this area, but moderate smoke was still emitting. The fire chief then took a moment to evaluate its suppression activities on the alpha side of the structure. So the fire starts in the lobby, gets up into the lobby ceiling roof area, which is backed up with this parapet wall. So we know eventually it gets into the auditorium. So clearly it gets through this wall, this parapet wall. So this parapet, something's holding it up, right? So is it parapeted all the way down to the floor? Is it concrete block all the way to the floor? Is there a steel beam in there that holds the block up? Like, I don't know.
Well, and the big thing is the fire chief keeps going back to manual tasks. So you can tell that he's not seeing himself as command.
Fire chief.
New commander. I did that. The first time I was in charge at a scene, I was a captain or battalion chief or something like that. And someone was having trouble starting a chainsaw. And right away, I jumped in, grabbed the chainsaw, started it for him. And it was actually our old chief's house that had a fire. And he comes to me, he says, Paul, he says, you're captain, you're in charge. Yeah. He says, well, then you're not touching the chainsaw. You need to be watching the guys. Someone else will do the chainsaw. That's not your job anymore. And I use that example every time I teach ICS 100 or 200 when it talks about that command presence and focused on command. And this guy's clearly not doing that.
Well, if you're not getting information feedback to you on what's going on, or you're not requesting that information, or you don't have an adequate communication system, adequate radios, or you haven't trained your officers in communicating, or your firefighters, then as an incident commander, you don't know what's going on. And so the temptation is to walk there and see for yourself.
But he was taking the roof vent off.
You're falling into that trap. That's right. Anyway, the fire chief did not speak with the mutual aid department operating on the Charlie side of the structure and had not received updates from them either. So it's almost in the fire chief's mind like they weren't there, I guess. I don't know. They were just doing their thing and he was okay with that. Once the aerial crew was at the tip of the aerial ladder, they observed 2 separate burnt-through holes on the roof of the Bravo and Delta side corners directly behind the parapet wall, with fire emitting from both. So they could see fire coming out of the Alpha Bravo and Alpha Delta corners of the actual bowstring truss roof behind the parapet. So I don't think they could probably see the holes, but they could see fire coming up. This crew did not know the roof was bowstring roof construction. There had been smoke too, of course. The Bravo side hole was approximately 4 feet in area, and the Delta side hole was approximately 2 feet in area. So these are pretty small holes. Due to the angle of their ladder and the height of the parapet wall, they could not direct the master stream directly into those holes, which you shouldn't be doing anyways, but that's okay, and instead attempted to ricochet the water stream. The 2 firefighters operating on the aerial ladder then decided to check the stability of the roof located behind the parapet wall by directing the elevated master stream all over the roof. This department's hose crew, which was operating in the area of the bathrooms, so those are the guys that had gone left and met the mutual aid crew and then turned around and went right towards the Delta side. So they were operating in the area of the bathrooms, recalled debris falling on them from the drop ceiling and then being able to see blue sky and water coming from outside. That'd be the master stream on the aerial. The aerial crew immediately observed the water turn into steam and felt the roof had been compromised. They then immediately used the intercom system at the tip of the ladder to advise the aerial operator who was on the ground of their findings.
You can see
A lot
why
of
I
stuff
chose.
going on there.
You can see why I chose this incident to talk about, right?
So you
Because
got
this is
two
stuff that
crews inside and your aerial master stream through holes in the roof.
Yep. Okay, we move on to the mutual aid department prior to collapse because, of course, we had no comms between the two. It was like running two different scenes in the same building. Upon arrival to the incident scene, the driver and first assistant mutual aid chief on tanker engine 1 observed the first and second assistant chief standing in the roadway, directing them to the rear of the theater. They turned down a side street just south of the Delta side exposure before turning north to access the alley behind the theater. The first assistant mutual aid chief observed black smoke rolling from the vents located on the Charlie side wall. These conditions were not communicated to the first due department operating on the Alpha side.
There's a note here. Initially, although not verbally stated but understood, the first assistant mutual aid chief was the officer in charge, or IC, for the mutual aid department.
The first assistant mutual aid chief then advised Engine 2 over the radio channel to lay in from the hydrant located just south of the theater. Engine 2 took the hydrant, and the second assistant mutual aid chief, riding as the officer, noticed that the fire appeared to be through the roof towards the Alpha side of the structure. The first assistant mutual aid chief directed his driver operator to open the door located on the Charlie side at the Bravo corner. Black-gray smoke immediately rolled out the door. The first assistant mutual aid chief assisted Engine 2 personnel in connecting the 5-inch supply line to tanker Engine 1. Firefighter 1 pulled off a 2.5-inch hose line with a Y and took it to the open door. He disconnected and replaced it a 50-foot section of 2.5-inch hose from the Y with 100 feet of 1.75-inch hose line. The fire chief, who is the on-duty patrol officer, first discovered the fire, met them at the rear and advised them to place 2 PPV fans at the open door and that the fire was located in the lobby area at the front of the theater. The fire chief, the on-duty patrol officer, then returned to the Alpha side of the structure to speak with the first due department personnel about conditions at the rear. The driver operator of tanker engine 1, firefighter 1 and firefighter 2, and the victim pull out their PPE and SCBAs in preparation for advancing the 1.75-inch hose line into the theater from the Charlie side. According to the first assistant mutual aid chief, the reason their department had entered into the theater from the rear, the unaffected side, was to stop any fire from coming further into the theater. So, I mean, it's a good tactic if it was coordinated and you didn't know it wasn't a bowstring truss roof and you had black smoke coming out the Charlie wall.
Attacking from the Umbrella side is a tactic that's well used, but generally
Right.
speaking, it's better when you know where the fire is.
Exactly. Especially you've got this huge void space in the ceiling, right?
And
The first assistant mutual aid chief assumed that first due department knew they were entering the building even though they had not communicated this to the first officer in charge. The first assistant mutual aid chief then passed his command to the second assistant mutual aid chief who had arrived on engine 2. The first assistant mutual aid chief was going to be the backup for the 4 personnel that he was sending into the building. The second assistant mutual, so he's kind of wants to act like a captain basically. The second assistant mutual aid chief had been monitoring both department channels and stated to NIOSH investigators that he never heard any communications from the first due fire department. The mutual aid interior 4-man crew, driver operator of tanker engine 1, victim, firefighter 1 and firefighter 2 entered the theater advancing the 1.75-inch line and carrying their individual radios in their coat pockets, but they left the department's thermal imaging camera in the apparatus. After entering the theater, the crew walked down 4 or 5 steps before reaching the floor of the auditorium, because remember it was sloped to the Charlie side.
There's a stage, eh? There's a stage area where the screen is, right? So
right. The interior crew noted how this area only contained whitish gray smoke, thinking that the PPV fans were working. Of course, that's a common fool in a large building. It doesn't see it really smoky at the floor sometimes because it's all contained up top. They advanced the hose line up the Bravo side aisle, noticed fire towards the front of the auditorium at the Alpha Bravo corner. When they got to the rear of the auditorium, they noticed the fire was in a glassed-in room, possibly that same quiet room. They removed some wall curtains and broke out the glass panel before spraying water into this room. The fire had reached up into the ceiling of this room, but the room contents were quickly knocked down.
Yeah, at this time, the first two area ladder crew observed fire through the roof in this area.
So it probably had burned through the ceiling and into the roof structure. The mutual aid four-man crew noticed a hallway to the left of this room leading out to the lobby and advanced their hose line a few feet down this hallway before they were met by a two-man hose crew from the first due department. The first due department crew then went back to the lobby area while the mutual aid crew stayed in the hallway, spraying water back and forth between the hallway ceiling and the quiet room. They were also having a discussion about going to get pike poles to pull the ceiling in the quiet room when they were hit by water from the elevated master stream. At the same time, the first assistant mutual aid chief had just placed a ground ladder at the Bravo Charlie corner when the elevated master stream struck him and knocked masonry blocks off the parapet wall, striking a firefighter in the head who was wearing his helmet and landing on the second assistant chief's foot, breaking it. It was then that the first assistant mutual aid chief realized the roof wasn't flat, but rather arched. The victim and the driver operator of Tanker Engine 1 decided to follow the hose line out and get pike poles and talk to somebody about getting the elevated master stream turned off. They both exited the building through the Charlie side. The victim waited at the doorway while the driver operator of Tanker Engine 1 went to change his air bottle. They spoke to the first and second mutual aid chiefs about the conditions, the need for pike poles, and turning off the elevated master stream. The first assistant mutual aid chief stated that he retrieved a pike pole for the victim, but the victim had already re-entered the building before getting the pole. While waiting next to the quiet room, Firefighter 1, Firefighter 2 stated that the victim returned to them fairly quickly, but without any pike poles. The victim pulled his radio from his coat pocket and had a discussion with Firefighter 1 and Firefighter 2 just before the roof collapse. From the first due fire department's vantage point, during this time, the fire chief had decided to walk down the D side of the theater. There was a narrow little alleyway, like Denis mentioned, about 6 feet wide between the two buildings, because he had an unsure feeling about the fire. After walking a few yards down the D side wall, he decided to evacuate the building. He called for an evacuation 3 times over his department radio channel while he returned to the Alpha side of the building. The mutual aid department had the first due department's radio channel for fireground operations, but they did not remember hearing any radio transmissions to evacuate the building. Most of the mutual aid fire department's radios were still on their main fireground channel and scanning other channels. The aerial ladder crew, still spraying master stream on the roof, watched the 2 holes get larger until the B and D side holes met at the center of the roof line. The aerial crew then observed the roof collapse inward into the auditorium from the parapet wall all the way to the Charlie side exterior wall, so total roof collapse. The interior hose crew was separated near the bathrooms from debris falling during the collapse. Also, the aerial crew recalled hearing an air horn sound from the Charlie side of the theater. After reaching the A side, the fire chief recalled heavy gray smoke rising from the auditorium area, but the lobby area was free of fire and smoke. The fire chief immediately notified dispatch of the collapse and requested additional fire and EMS units to the scene. The fire chief overheard many of his firefighters say the building was clear, but he was stopped by his first assistant chief, who advised him that the victim's department was still inside at the time of collapse. The Engine 1 operator recalled hearing the following radio transmissions over their fireground channel. Evacuate building. Everyone's out of the building. No, the mutual aid department's firefighters are still inside. Well, get them out. This was all over the radio. So the fire chief then walked into the theater's lobby and observed the roof down in the auditorium with fire burning in different areas. He rushed from the lobby over to his aerial ladder and advised the crew on the ladder to direct the master stream on the spot fires within the auditorium. The first due department's interior hose crew was able to self-extricate after collapse by following their hose line out. No mayday was called by the first due department, but their interior hose crew did attempt to transmit over the radio while still inside. There was lots of radio transmissions. The first assistant chief ordered the accountability officer to the Charlie side to take accountability for the mutual aid department. The mutual aid department advised the accountability officers that they would handle accountability on Charlie's side so that the accountability officer could return to the Alpha side for search and rescue. When the AO returned, they advised the fire chief or aerial operator that they were having trouble keeping up with accountability because responders were rushing into the theater to help. The aerial operator then advised the fire chief to stay outside of the building and pull everyone out of the theater so they could get a handle on accountability. The fire chief then advised the aerial operator that he needed more manpower to assist in getting the trapped firefighters out before focusing on accountability. The fire chief advised NIOSH investigators that he never spoke to any personnel from the mutual aid department immediately following the collapse, but he felt he had a good idea where the trapped firefighters were. From the mutual aid department's vantage point of the collapse, while standing near the quiet room, firefighter 1 and 2 stated that they heard a weird noise followed by ceiling tiles falling on them. Firefighter 1 and 2 and the victim decided that they needed to leave immediately. They followed the hose line heading out to the Charlie side door. That was like 100 feet away, or almost, right? 75 feet. The victim was first, followed by firefighter 2 and firefighter 1. They traveled approximately 10 to 15 feet before the roof began to collapse in on them. Firefighter 1 saw the roof collapsing behind him, so he dove into the B-side aisle, while firefighter 2 was struck by roof debris that pushed him down into the aisle. Firefighter 1 and firefighter 2 did not know where the victim was, but firefighter 1 could reach out and touch firefighter 2's boot. The patrol officers, which was the victim's fire chief, had just come back to the Charlie side of the theater and was having a conversation with his first assistant chief about the elevated master stream being used on the roof and that they should be getting interior firefighters out of the structure to evaluate conditions when the roof collapsed. Firefighters from the mutual aid department, still operating on the Charlie side, recalled seeing heavy black smoke pushed out the Charlie side door where their interior crew had entered. They were unaware that the roof had collapsed until after the first assistant mutual aid chief looked through the door and could not see anything. He immediately went on air and followed the hose line in. The patrol officer immediately went to Emergency Rescue 1 and Engine 2 and had personnel sound sirens and air horns. At this time, information regarding the collapse was transmitted over the radio channel. Following the collapse, firefighter 1 and 2 recalled being in a couple of inches of water and the elevated master stream was still flowing into the building and hitting them at times. The first assistant mutual aid chief stated he was in waist-deep water after he entered the building, because remember, it's that sloped floor at the other end, right? As he went down the stairs into the auditorium. Firefighter 1 and 2 also remember fire burning around them and on top of them. Firefighter 1 and 2 also heard victims say, "Go on," still on air, say, "Let's go, guys. Come on, let's get us out." No other verbal communications from the victim were heard following the activation of his pass device. Moments later, air alarm began to sound from his SCBA, followed by his pass device. When he ran out of air, he kept his facepiece on but removed his mask-mounted regulator. At about the same time, the first assistant mutual aid chief was inside the building but could not get very far up the B aisle due to the collapsed debris. He stated he heard what he thought to be a pass device alarm, but he was not sure due to noise of the PPV fans running and the elevated master stream flowing water into the building. He then exited the building to hear their air horn sounding Mayday call and the patrol officer, which was their fire chief, asking for accountability in person. The driver-operator of Tanker Engine 1 called firefighter 1 and 2 and the victim on the radio channel without response. The firefighters from the mutual aid department stated they never heard any radio transmissions from the first due department regarding evacuation, collapse, or rescue operations. Following his transmission attempts, the driver-operator of Tanker Engine 1 re-entered the building, following the hose line with another firefighter and a second 1 3/4 hose line to see if they could get further into the collapse area. But they were unsuccessful in getting any further than the first assistant chief had earlier, but they were able to confirm the sound of a pass alarm. Phew, what a nasty incident.
Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about search, rescue, and recovery operations. Additional attempts were made by both departments to enter into the theater from the Alpha and also from the Charlie sides. Entry through the Alpha side provided fire personnel the best means to access the auditorium. Remember, there's deep water also at the Charlie side, right?
Yeah, and the roof had collapsed or pancaked onto the center rows, and rows of seating at that point.
Yeah, if you look at the photos, there's an elevated photo of the interior of the collapse. You can see that there's it's really a total collapse, but there is some lean-to areas further back in the building, so you can see it would be hard to get in from the Charlie side.
Yeah, when you see the pictures, it makes a little bit more sense than just.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Additional mutual aid personnel arrived to assist with search and rescue operations as well. The first two fire chiefs stated to NIOSH investigators that he positioned himself with his second assistant chief within the hallway leading into the auditorium. He stated he remembered many firefighters from his and the mutual aid departments coming and going through the hallway as they searched in the auditorium through the debris and the water, knee to waist deep in some areas the water was. Many firefighters stated to NIOSH investigators that there was no coordinated search and rescue effort, and the search area was extremely loud from the PPV fans and master stream flowing water. While firefighters were searching within the debris, firefighter 2, who had completely removed his SCBA pack, was able to remove some roof debris from around him and was able to pull himself up in order to alert firefighters. Two firefighters quickly noticed him and assisted him out of the debris. Just before being removed, he stated that he was lying in 10 inches of water. Firefighter 2 was then assisted out of the theater by the first fire chief and his second assistant chief. Once out, Firefighter 2 remembered that the noise in the collapse area was extremely loud from the elevated master stream that was still flowing water and the PPV fans that were blowing from the lobby area now and into the rear of the building. So you got fans from both sides with the roof collapsed. I'm not sure why. Firefighter 1 then was located and removed from the debris and assisted out the Alpha side to the EMS unit that was waiting outside. The first two fire chief recalled hearing that all firefighters had been accounted for, so the fire chief walked over to speak with EMS personnel who advised them that they'd only received two firefighters who had been trapped in the collapse. The fire chief then had personnel continue search and rescue operations, still looking for that third person, the victim. The first two fire chiefs remained within the theater hallway as fire personnel searched throughout the auditorium area, focusing on the B side aisle. The first two fire chiefs recalled someone retrieving a thermal imaging camera to assist with finding the victim. After removing a piece of debris from the Bravo side aisle, a firefighter discovered a single firefighting glove floating in approximately 3 feet of water. Personnel within the auditorium began to focus on searching this area for the victim. They were then able to find the victim's face down after seeing a helmet and an SCBA bottle in the water, under the water, in other words, within the water. The firefighter was able to stand in the water and get under the victim and lift his upper body. The firefighter checked for a pulse and confirmed that the victim was deceased. Firefighters remarked that the SCBA backframe had been damaged and the SCBA bottle was only attached by the airline. The SCBA bottle was disconnected to assist in freeing the victim, who was partially trapped by what appeared to be piping from a boiler system. The firefighter holding the victim stated to NIOSH investigators that the victim was still wearing his helmet with his chin strap attached, his protective hood and his face piece with his mask-mounted regulator also attached and properly positioned about his face. The firefighter noted the victim's face piece was sunken in on the left side, but still appeared intact. After additional personnel assisted in removing debris from around the victim was removed from the water and placed in a Stokes basket.
Tragic. Yeah, drowned in. Of course, that water had nowhere to go, and you're pumping it in for how long with that ladder at 1,000 gallons a minute or so.
But risky also because you've got all those debris, a lot of which is just sitting on the seating, right? So the seats don't do a great job of holding up, heavy debris like heavy roofing, right? And
Right,
that
they would
roof
just
had been there for
collapse.
what? Yeah, we already know that the roof had originally been a metal roof. It was left, and then had been asphalted over, asphalt shingles or some, asphalting had been put over the roof at one time. So the roof weighed more. Plus, these trusses are very heavy. And now you've got two freestanding block walls too on either side that were probably not all that stable. So a lot of risks involved. Okay, fire origin, cause, and behavior. A little bit about that. And there's not much. So the state and federal fire arson investigators did investigate the origin and cause of the fire. And these investigators determined that the fire was accidental and originated in the lobby area of the theater. So not much information at all. But I will say that the quiet room on the Bravo side adjoined on this wall with the concessions stand.
Yeah.
So the concessions and the quiet room were back to back on either side of this block wall.
Could have
So
been overheated
if the fire
wiring
started,
or something.
Yeah, if the fire started, for instance, in the popcorn machine or the butter melter or whatever had been turned on, it could easily have communicated through to the theater side because old building, for sure, there was lots of openings for fire to pass back and forth.
Yep.
And so that I'm actually disappointed that that's all they could determine, that it started in the lobby. So anyway, there's a series of recommendations that came out of this. And recommendation number 1 is that fire departments should ensure that an effective incident management system is established with a designated incident commander who is not involved in fire suppression activities.
Yeah,
So
I think
the
we already
discussion
talked
around
about that a lot. Eh?
Yeah.
Pretty self-explanatory here.
Yeah, it's a common theme, really. And it's not just these very small departments who go to very few incidents, and a lot of the tactics in this were house fire tactics, inch and three-quarter
Yep.
line, PPV, big building, like not necessarily appropriate. I mean, you should have been in there with 2.5, and not talking to each other, just basically departments freelancing. So a lot of issues. Anyway, I'm sure they'll come up in the recommendations. Anyway, discussion. Most incidents are considered routine and involve a small commitment of resources. In other words, high frequency, low risk events like house fires, trash bin fires, fires in somebody's backyard, that type of a thing. So I won't call a house fire low risk. It's a mistake to say that, but the risks are more understood, I would say. Anyway, few incidents involve large commitments of resources, more complex situations, and are of the low frequency, high risk type events. An incident management system is intended to provide a standardized approach to the management of emergency incidents. We've talked about that many times on this podcast.
Well, and I used to say this. I would get in trouble or get dirty looks from the guys, but I mean, the fire department's not there for car fires, grass fires, garbage cans, even a single house fire. I mean, kitchen and contents or room and contents or a kitchen fire. That's really not why the municipality spends millions and millions of dollars and people dedicate their time and effort and training and lives towards the fire service. It's for the fires like this. It's for the multiple house fires, the house fire with people trapped in it, et cetera, et cetera. But we lose that focus. We get complacent with garbage cans, grass fires, car fires, room and contents fires. But that's not why we have 2.5-inch line or 6-inch hose or ladder trucks.
6-inch supply hose, yeah. That's right, exactly. Anyway, during this incident, the assumption of overall command was never declared over the radio to other firefighters on arrival. I guess if you're just going to department calls, Joe's in charge. He's always in charge. That's the way you look at it. The mutual aid department was directed to the rear of the theater without knowing fire conditions or knowing what the incident action plan for mutual aid operations was, nor the strategy, the tactics, and or even the communications. They weren't even on the same radio channel. Also, the first due department chief officers, who served as their ICs on the Alpha side, were involved with fireground activities, such as securing water supply, securing utilities, walking around to the back trying to get the utilities turned off, and with search and rescue operations, which significantly reduced their ability to function as an IC. I think that's really understating it. I think it did more than significantly reduce it. It basically negated it.
Yeah,
At
and I
least
mean,
from
he
at
said
least
in his own thing, he said he was thinking defensive, but they didn't behave that way.
yeah.
Well, the front crew, the Alpha crew, went in on their own. They weren't told to go inside. And then the Charlie side crew, well, they did what they wanted to do. And so that defensive, he was willing to fight it from the outside. The risk was too high and we'll let it burn. But that didn't happen.
Yeah, there was no liaison between the two fire departments fighting two separate fires in the same building.
Recommendation number 2. Fire departments should ensure that a complete situational size-up is conducted at all structure fires. Discussion. Among the most important duties of the first officer on scene is conducting that 360 situational size-up of the incident and transmitting this information to units on the fire grounds or responding to the incident. In order to
And
accomplish this,
dispatch.
and dispatch. In order to accomplish this, the first officer on scene needs to have the requisite knowledge of elements for a proper size up. A proper size up begins from the moment the alarm is received and continues until the fire is brought under control, either offensively or defensively. During this
Can I
incident,
also say, Paul, this is one of my hobby horses. Theater fire, probably biggest fire within the entire volunteer career for each individual is at this fire. Biggest fire they've ever been to, biggest fire they'll likely ever go to. It's not the time to learn how to do a first do report. You
that's
do
why
one at
I
every incident.
That's why I like programs like Blue Card or Effective Command that simulates real fires for officers to practice using computers or iPads or teamwork, or even the emergency scene management course, JIBC, done with the little model city and buildings and little cars and trucks and fire hoses. The training is invaluable for officers to fight those fires with. They've been there before.
But these guys are going to 50 incidents a year, one or two of which are fires. So that's 50 times to practice your arrival report. I mean,
Exactly.
yeah, okay, we're arriving, there's a garbage can on fire, no big deal. But do your report accurately, and then it just becomes in the brain. You can't, if you don't do it in a big incident, you feel there's something missing, and you'll pretty soon remember what that is. So
So during this incident, the two departments on scene established their own suppression activities from opposing sides. The officers in charge did not walk around the structure or communicate with each other on conditions that were encountered. Also, the bowstring truss roof construction and the hazards associated with that type of roof were never identified by personnel on the scene.
recommendation 3, fire departments should use risk management principles at all structure fires. So discussion around that. While it is recognized that firefighting is an inherently hazardous occupation, risk management principles established by the fire service are based on the philosophy that greater risk will be assumed when there are lives to be saved, and the level of acceptable risk to firefighters is much lower when only property is at stake. Alan Brunacini. Bruno talks about this all the time. It's one of his major mantras. Risk a lot to save a lot, risk little to save nothing. Interior offensive firefighting operations can increase the risk of traumatic injury and death to firefighters from structural collapse, from burns, or from asphyxiation. We see that on this podcast. That's what we do. In this incident, it was made clear by the theater owner that no civilians were in the building. So the risk to life was the firefighters. When it is confirmed that there is no risk, the IC must then decide what risks they are willing to place their personnel in based on risk versus gain. Of course, they thought they just had a minor fire. During this incident, there was no...
Yeah, small fire in the lobby, right? Although the chief had second thoughts right away. Like he said, this is going to be defensive.
Yes, and then he decided to go defensive, but
Didn't tell anybody.
he says that he broadcast that, but nobody remembers ever hearing it.
Yep.
So that suggests that he didn't. Maybe he decided to leg it back to the front and tell somebody, which he might have done. During this incident, there was no clearly defined IC to make decisions on risk management, and as a result, an offensive nor a defensive strategy and tactics were not communicated. Communications were not established between the two fire departments, let alone between the IC and both fire departments, and each department had a different view of fire and smoke conditions. That's pretty common on a big building to have a different view. That's not unusual. Again, even on a house fire, you can have a different view. The observation of the burn-through holes on the roof by the firefighters on the elevated master stream, on the ladder in other words, should have prompted an immediate removal of all interior firefighters and a defensive operation. Remember, those guys up on top, when they saw the holes, they used the intercom to tell the guy at the bottom that they saw holes in the roof with fire emitting. What happened to that message when it got to the bottom?
Yep.
Doesn't sound like it went very far. Maybe it
Nope.
did. We don't know. It should be noted that the patrol officer, who was the fire chief of the mutual aid department, confirmed that the theater was empty and had evacuated the fire building exposures on the Bravo and Delta sides prior to units arriving. So there was no life risk here. This type of information needs to be passed on to all units and or departments responding to the incident, and a decision needs to be made on whether they're going to go offensive or defensive. And it's handy, I think, if you're working on any side of the building, that you all know that. The incident action plan, in other words.
Absolutely. Yep.
Anyway, continuing on.
Yep.
Recommendation 4, fire departments should work together to develop mutual aid standard operating procedures for fireground operations and procedures that support interagency operability and accountability and train on those procedures. I would also say that EMS is part of that. More and more we're seeing that EMS is part of your resources and your strategy. So discussion on this. Mutual aid companies should train together. Reportedly, these two never did, and should not wait until an incident occurs to attempt to integrate participating departments into a functional team. With very few large incidents going on, like 1 to 2 fires a year, let alone fires that require mutual aid, clearly you're not going to have a lot of opportunity to practice on real fires your mutual aid skills. So you've got to do them in drills. I think they said that there are 3 or 4 times a year they have acquired structures, each department, that they do live fire burns on. And that's what they said earlier. So why couldn't those live fire burns be mutual aid events? Treat them like real incidents. Like, it's hard to believe that they didn't do that.
Back in the mid-'80s, when I first became a firefighter, and then I became a apparatus and equipment salesman, I started visiting all the departments in the area, of course, trying to sell them stuff. And it just blew me away how they all spoke about how great their mutual aid system was and how much they worked together and stuff, when they didn't have a clue. They never met, they never worked together, they didn't have any common training or anything or radios. This is Corman Park around Saskatoon. But today, since I left there in 92, they were already doing joint trainings. And today it's a very strong mutual aid area that works together all the time and trains together, and it can change. But I can see how this happens. In Manitoba and Saskatchewan, the mutual aid groups are forced to meet quarterly. So all the communities have to send representatives to mutual aid meetings. Ontario does this too, I believe, right, Denny? Where the province establishes the mutual aid areas, and you have to do something and have people in. So you at least, exchange business cards before the emergency kind of thing.
Well, Ontario does more than that. They have zones and areas, and they appoint mutual aid coordinators, provincially appointed for each. I know I was one for 20 years. They're provincially appointed, and their job is to ensure that mutual aid works in those areas. That's their job.
In Alberta, there's
it's not a full-time job. It's one of those. You're the fire chief. You could do this job.
Right.
It's one of those jobs.
Yeah. Alberta has no provincially appointed mutual aid areas or organizers or anything. It's encouraged. It's promoted. There's funding available a little bit, and it's part of the mutual aid or part of the Municipalities Act that you have to prepare for emergencies. But there's no organized system. They're talking about it right now, actually. That new report I just sent you last week about communities need to work together and to have thresholds for responding and all that kind of stuff.
One of the things I wonder about is, large departments. How well do they mutual aid with each other? Because I've seen areas where it's really bad. Like, we don't use mutual aid.
Yeah, that's common in much of
even now
Western Canada, especially. Yep, for sure.
Yeah, we're not quite finished with this, but anyway, it says that during this incident, each department had varying levels of information, um, and that were contained within their individual department guidelines. Although we said earlier they didn't have guidelines for fires, basically, and none for mutual aid. Although they had signed a countywide mutual aid agreement, but there were no SOPs or SOGs that went part and parcel with that agreement. So I'm not sure how they thought that that was going to work, and clearly in this incident it didn't. And they had different accountability systems. They did not have a standardized accountability system, and their packs were different. So having different packs is not unusual, but you should definitely have standardized accountability systems. And the departments didn't train together, as we talked about, and they didn't train in particular on Mayday situations. So it's a problem all the way around.
The recommendation 5, department should ensure that the incident safety officer, ISO position, independent from the incident commander, is appointed and effectively utilized at every structure fire, meeting the requirements of NFPA 1521. According to NFPA 1521, the Standard on Emergency Services Incident Management System, the incident commander shall have overall authority for management of the incident, and the commander shall ensure that adequate safety measures are in place. This shall include overall responsibility for safety and health of all personnel and for other persons operating within the incident management system. While the incident commander is in overall command at the scene, certain functions must be delegated to ensure adequate scene management is accomplished. This is standard ICS stuff. During this incident, the SOs for both departments had never received any formal training on what is expected of them during an emergency incident. The first due department's safety officer was available at the theater fire, but was occupied at times with fireground activities such as water supply, setting up fire suppression activities. During the incident, the SO was not able to focus his attention on the structure, the conditions, the safety and health of firefighters operating at the scene.
All this points very clearly at a lack of training, a lack of
Yep.
SOPs, and a lack of practice.
Yep.
Right? It's fine to get a blue helmet and sticker on the side that says SO, but that doesn't make you an SO. You got to know what you're doing. You got to be willing to do it, and avoid falling into the trap of doing things that your hands are used to doing, and do things that your head tells you need to
But
do.
look at Alberta here. So a province of what? 7 million, 4 million, something like that. 5 million. It's growing fast, but anyway, 5 million. You cannot take a certified Alberta-based incident safety officer course. It's not available through municipal affairs. They do not offer IFSAC or Pro Board testing and certification. To get it, most people in Alberta bring in instructors from the JIBC, the province over, to do it. But that's expensive to bring an instructor in to teach a class. I took it back in, 2013 or 2014 or something. But so this should be a priority, but for some reason it isn't. I teach safety officer for the incident command curricula, which is similar, but it's not fire based. It's just crazy that we don't have that available. It's such a critical component to a emergency scene.
And I agree. So much of safety is lip service. We don't actually do the things that we need to do, and being afraid to go into a fire because it's unsafe, or being afraid to take the risk to rescue somebody because it's unsafe, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about operating in the safest possible manner. So you got three ways to do something. One way is extremely dangerous. One way's takes appropriate risks for the appropriate gain, and the other way is to be ultra safe and do nothing. You need to take the one in the middle where you're considering all the things that could go wrong, doing the things that you need to do to not have a bad outcome for you, but yet have a good outcome for your customers. So you got to know all of those paths, and you got to know which one to take, and you got to practice, man. You can't learn this at the first incident that you're ever going to go to.
Fire departments should ensure that a rapid intervention crew or RIC is rapidly available on scene and prepared to respond to firefighter emergencies. As for discussion, a RIT should be designated and available to respond before interior attack operations begin and throughout the duration of the incident. The team should report to the incident commander, conduct a scene size up of the structure and incident, and maintain a position in a location that promotes rapid access to the structure if a mayday is declared. When standing by, the rig should monitor radio traffic and continuously size up the incident and not assist in regular firefighting activities. During this incident, the victim's department had established a rig standing operating procedure, but had not established a rig during the incident or following the collapse. Following the collapse, both departments sent personnel inside the theater to look for the firefighters who were trapped in an uncoordinated manner. Uncoordinated searches and rescue efforts can actually impede the efforts to finding missing firefighters, while also exposing the rescuers to potential unsafe conditions. Yeah, I was, yeah. I mean, Blue
Uh,
Card has the on deck crew, right?
yep.
This one here, they should have. I mean, they should have asked for more mutual aid, which
Mm,
might have contributed to even more chaos. But in general terms, that the reason why the Chiefs were constantly going forth and back between instant commanding and hands-on stuff is because there weren't enough people there, right?
right.
So they should have done this way earlier, and I think they called more mutual aid after the collapse.
After the
But again,
collapse. Yep.
they're mentioning, okay, rapid intervention crews should monitor the radio. Well, we don't even know if they were all on the radio. I mean, we know they weren't on the same radio channel, right? It was just, yeah, really chaotic on scene. And if you have a collapse, you have to coordinate that. You have to get everybody out and then organize your rescue to have a structure for that, right? And
Yeah,
that
because the
didn't happen.
risks of that structure further collapsing were high, right? I mean,
Yeah,
this happened.
exactly.
Yeah, I can hear the voices saying that, well, in my department, we don't have enough personnel to have a safety officer. We don't have enough personnel on scene to have a RIC there early. We don't have. In this department, as reported, is they had 21 people they accounted for who came on vehicles. They said a few more came in privately operated vehicles. So let's say they had roughly 25 firefighters on scene. So is that enough to do a fire in an occupied building of any size, like a residential building, a 2 or 3 story? It's not. You need upwards of 30 some people for those types of structures. But as a fire chief or a fire department, you need to know the staffing levels necessary to deal with certain size incidents. The minimum for a detached single family residence is at least 12 to 14 firefighters. And that's if you've got a hydrant and water supply. And that's if things are going relatively well. So you go from there. You need upwards. And these ones here, they only had like 11 or 12 or 13 on the alpha side and more on the, so like, absolutely right. They needed more mutual aid. And when they saw they had a fire, they needed to confirm that they had a fire, one, and then get more people on there. What if it had gotten into the Bravo or the Delta side exposures? What then? You have 2 or 3. You could this is how you burn down your entire downtown by failing to have adequate.
Exactly
Right.
how you do it.
Yeah, and
Always
it wasn't
think
a
ahead,
lack
yeah.
of water. It wasn't a lack of water supply. They had a 6-inch line off a hydrant on the Alpha side street, and there was a street on the Charlie side. They had a 5-inch supply off another hydrant back there. They were running deck guns, or not deck guns. Well, they were, but they
Aerial,
were also
yeah.
running elevated streams. They were running lines in the front, lines in the rear. So they had water. They didn't have manpower, and they didn't have organization.
Well,
And
they had enough manpower to deal with the situation as is.
defensively.
Defensively, absolutely. But as
Right.
soon as something happens, and again, you got to think ahead. What is the possibility here, right? If something happens, and guys get exhausted even sitting on the hand line, right? If
Yeah.
they're breathing air, at some point they have to be replaced. So, yeah, as a fire commander or incident commander, you have to think ahead.
Yeah. By the way, there is a video of this fire.
Yeah,
You
I
can
thought I
find
was going
it.
to mention that.
Yeah, but it doesn't show the collapse, but it does show the activities that were going on the Alpha side.
Yeah,
And
I need to find that
it
video.
doesn't show great
Do you know where
organization,
it is?
I got to tell you.
Can you send me a
Not
link?
right off the top of my head,
No,
but
I can look for
Googling
it.
try
I can
try
look for it.
Googling it.
Yeah, I will.
Abbotsford
Yeah, Abbotsford, Wisconsin. I remember seeing it at the time.
Yeah, it's not great quality. It was done by
No.
a civilian standing on the road. So anyway,
Recommendation 7, fire departments should conduct pre-incident planning. Not like we haven't seen this before. Exactly the same episode we just did, which was the Pittston, Pennsylvania, within their jurisdiction buildings to facilitate the development of safe fireground strategies and tactics. 1620 NFPA standard for pre-incident planning. Purpose of the document is to develop pre-incident plans to assist responding personnel in effectively managing emergencies for the protection of occupants, responding personnel, property, and the environment. Prior to this incident, the theater had not been pre-planned, but had received several fire inspections by the first two fire department. However, no information regarding the building construction type had been documented, including the presence of the bowstring truss roof. So I'll give a plug to our friends at APX Data. I mean, you can get, that's just one. There's all kinds of pre-planning software, especially just your target risks. Don't worry about doing everything. Not every, but your target risks. A theater is a high-risk place. You're going to have 200 people in there every Friday and Saturday night, and maybe 100 on Sunday matinee. And kids or elderly people. You need to pre-plan these things. What if they're doing a play or something? So these things are important.
but anyway, to quote Francis Brannigan, one of the people I like to quote, know your buildings.
Mm-hmm.
So they didn't know this was a bowstring truss, but when you walk into this building, there was ceiling, a flat ceiling above you. When you stood outside and looked at the building, all you saw were these parapet walls. You could not see the actual roof itself. So you could see the parapet of walls outside, and from inside you saw a flat ceiling. But what you did see inside is you saw a building that was very deep and quite wide, and it was clear span ceiling. So there was something up there holding that up, and for sure it was trusses. At the very least, it was very large section beams going all the way across. It was something like that. So you needed to go up the ladder on the Charlie side and have a look in the attic. And as soon as you had done that, because the guy used to walk across there to change light bulbs, the theater owner, so you would then know that it was an arch bowstring truss roof, clear span. And so it was really hard to believe that nobody actually did that and understood their building, because that's part of a pre-plan. And fundamentally, you don't have a lot of buildings in this town. So, there's no reason why you wouldn't focus on looking at some that are of risk to you.
And generally speaking, if you have this big of a structure with fire burning through and burning a hole that actually meets, I don't care what construction that is. The ceiling, there's a high probability the ceiling is going to collapse, right? If it's bowstring or not, like it's just a matter of time. So defensive all the way, right?
It did well. It had two holes through the roof, which means fire was in that attic space. It actually held a long time.
And then they connected.
Right. And then
the
it
cord
collapsed.
failed, and it says that the roof collapsed all the way to the Charlie side. It didn't collapse bang all at once. It collapsed first truss, second
progressively,
truss, third
yeah.
truss, fourth truss, fifth truss, sixth, like that, bang, like an accordion.
Domino.
One after the other.
Domino effect.
Domino effect.
Yeah. There is also a video that shows a fire in another bowstring truss from a good angle that you can see, and there is a collapse. Now, mind you, the person that's taking the video is not a firefighter, is not really paying attention, but accidentally captures the bowstring truss collapse, and it's very instructive. You ever seen a slinky go down the stairs? Clink,
Yep.
clink, clink, clink. It does exactly that, just slinkies right to the other end. And if you were underneath of that, you'd be lucky to survive it.
Recommendation 8, fire department should familiarize and continually train all personnel on all types of building construction, especially those containing bowstring truss roofs. So, I mean, we've talked about this already, but, they're easily identified because of the arched or curved outline. This type of arched roof can span a large open area, you just said, unsupported by pillars or posts. So I'm not going to repeat all this because you just said it all. But firefighters.
But it would be useful nowadays to have a drone and do a drone of your downtown.
There you go. You could even have some fun while you're doing it. During
Not
this
in 2012,
incident,
but now.
firefighters and officers who were interviewed by NIOSH investigators were unaware of what a bowstring truss roof was, and that the theater's roof was constructed this way. So this is why we do the podcast. Hackensack, New Jersey happened in 1988. And I remember learning that then. This happened in 2012, and there's probably still people out there. So that's why we're doing this podcast in 2025 to go learn what a bowstring truss roof, learn how to recognize it, and other truss roofs as well. And the first thing you do if you walk into a commercial structure, I don't care what building it is, and if it's a confirmed working structure fire, take your pike pole and poke out a couple ceiling tiles right away. You need to know what's above your head. Was it burning? Is it full of smoke? Is it nothing? And the same thing, you walk into a house, open the closet, cut a little cut in the floor of the closet, a little triangle with your chainsaw to see what's underneath you. Because is it on fire? Then don't go in. Anyway, off my soapbox. I got distracted.
Recommendation 9, fire departments should train all personnel to identify the risks and hazards associated with supporting loaded structural components degraded by fire and the use of thermal imaging camera, and realize the potential for a structural collapse exists at all times. It's not just bowstring trusses. Roofs and floors, they're being held up by structure. When the structure's on fire, there's nothing to hold them up. They're coming down.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure how a thermal imaging camera can help you with identifying that unless you practice and train on it and watch video. I'm not sure how you can
I
see
think
it.
they're thinking looking for concealed fire, I think is what they're looking for.
Yeah.
But
But bringing
if
a
you had
thermal
gone
imaging
up,
camera is important, right?
but if you had gone up that ladder on the Charlie side inside, so the mutual aid department around the back, if they'd taken a thermal imaging camera in, gone up into the attic and peered down the length of the building, they would have seen the fire at the front of that roof structure.
Yeah.
So it's like a church, right? You got fire in the attic of a church. You're not likely going to save it. What's more concerning is the fact that even if they had known it was a bowstring truss, they didn't know that was a risk. So number one, they
Right.
didn't know it was a bowstring truss to start with, and secondly, they didn't even. And if they had known that, they would have just gone, "Oh, that's a funny looking truss," and not thought much beyond that from a fire perspective. So that's a concern. Know your buildings.
Okay, let's go to number 10 here. Fire department should train on and understand the use and operation of elevated master streams and its effect on structural degradation. So the discussion here would be master streams are one effective tool for fire suppression operations. Master streams can deliver a large volume of water over a distance while reducing the direct exposure of firefighters to the fire. Master stream operations can also accelerate structural degradation and can increase the risk of a building collapse. Because if you hammer in there with a big master stream, cinder brick walls, stuff like that, you might bring the roof down, even though it was not burned through. But if you take the supporting wall out, then you have a big problem, right? So in this incident, the elevated master stream was initially manually operated from the ground and directed blindly over the bowstring truss roof. Interior firefighters complained about the master stream coming into the building, and there was a lack of communication again prior to the collapse and following the collapse. Firefighters were also injured at the rear of the structure when cinder blocks were knocked off the roof by the elevated master stream. Elevated master stream should never be operated directly onto the firefighters, and care should be taken to all evaluate the amount of water added to the roof that has been structurally degraded by the fire. Also, you're flooding the building. If somebody's trapped in there, he's going to drown, right? So, yeah, that's all. If there's heavy fire, and I'm not sure out of the report if during the collapse there was still heavy fire, but there's no reason to keep your elevated master stream blasting the building when the roof came down and you have people trapped. So you gotta use a little bit of brain and say, hey, let's shut them down for now. And if the fire becomes a problem, then there's still hand lines, because they also brought hand lines in. So it's really about having your search and rescue operations, your major operations, coordinated with everybody involved.
Well,
We've had a couple.
It's easy to forget how much water you're moving with a master stream. You flow that thing for an hour or so, you're talking hundreds of thousands of gallons of water.
This isn't the only incident we've reviewed where the deceased firefighter, was found underwater.
Yep. Exactly. Recommendation 11, fire departments and dispatch centers should ensure emergency traffic over radio, such as Maydays, are effectively monitored, receiving the highest priority during an incident. The Mayday procedures can outline fireground response plan and duties of firefighters and officers, the dispatch center, and the incident commander. This could include establishing a separate radio channel for fireground operations, search and rescue, and/or water supply to help reduce any confusion during the Mayday. During this incident, neither department had established a Mayday procedure within their departments or with respective emergency dispatch centers. Emergency buttons on handheld radios were not programmed to alert or notify someone of an emergency or a downed firefighter. Following the collapse, no notification was made to dispatch regarding trapped firefighters on the scene.
They never, in their wildest dreams, thought they would have to have a Mayday. They just didn't think it at all. Last recommendation 12, fire departments should ensure that Mayday training programs are developed, good idea, and implemented, better idea, so that they adequately prepare firefighters to call a Mayday. I would also say this applies across mutual aid agreements too.
Yes.
It's not enough just for your department. It has to work with everybody who's on the scene. So the first and foremost priority, obviously, is not to get oneself into a situation where you're going to call a Mayday. But if you do get into that situation, you should have enough understanding, situational awareness that you are in trouble and execute your Mayday procedures. So, and again, we're going to talk about this IAFF Fireground Survival Program. We've talked about it a couple times. It's a simple resource. It's available online. Absolutely should take advantage of that. And it's just a starting point for understanding about, protecting yourself. Anyway, it said during this incident, neither department had conducted Mayday training. So all the firefighters on those scenes those days, I'm sure they knew what the word meant because they've watched movies on TV, but otherwise they didn't understand how it applied to them.
Yeah, you can take it online. It's like 4 hours or 6 hours online training. I mean, it's free. Anybody can take it. IAFF supports it.
Yeah, the Fireground
maintains
Survival Program. Yeah.
Yep.
So many resources available. Yeah. So many resources available just to take advantage of them. Sorry. Good.
Exactly. No, you're absolutely right. So hopefully this helps you think about this in the future, especially if you're a smaller department or a big department that doesn't do mutual aid. Think about it. What would happen? And I'm just thinking about it when I was listening to you here. The county I'm in, although the county fire departments work together lots on grass fires and the odd bigger structure fire and stuff, I doubt that there's any consistent SOGs between the departments because they're all independent entities. There's like 6 or 7 towns in this county, and I doubt that there's ever been any Mayday training as a group. So yeah, something to think about. Thanks everyone for listening to another episode of the Emergency Traffic Podcast. We hope that you continue to find these informative and educational. And as they say on the old Hill Street Blues, let's be safe out there now.
Stay low and go.
Take care every day.